Montana Territory, 1884. Caleb Hollister had come into Silver Creek at the tail end of a long day and meant to be gone before full dark, but the mercantile clerk had been slow with the order and the blacksmith had been slower with the wagon axle, and by the time he had loaded the last sack of feed onto the boards, the sky over the western ridge had already gone the color of a bruise. He was not a man who liked being caught in a town after sundown. He had grown up in one, a small mining settlement in the Bitterroots, and he had learned early the specific arithmetic of towns after dark, who drank where, who owed whom, which alleys were watched and which were not, and he had spent the last 6 years since his wife died learning the very different arithmetic of a ranch on the edge of nowhere, which was quieter and more honest, and asked less of a man than a town ever had. Silver Creek had what he needed: flour, salt, lamp oil, 3 coils of new fence wire, a bag of horseshoe nails, and a small tin of coffee that he had allowed himself the luxury of buying because winter was coming and coffee was the one thing he did not begrudge himself when the morning started at 4. He checked the harness, tightened the strap on the near horse, and climbed up onto the box. The main street of Silver Creek was already lit by the low yellow of oil lamps in the storefronts, and the air had that thin, sharp quality of a September evening in the high country, when the day had been warm enough to fool a man, and the night was going to remind him where he was. He was reaching for the reins when he heard the sound. It was not much of a sound. It was the shift of a body against the wooden slat of the wagon bed, the sort of small human noise that was too deliberate to be a rat and too quiet to be an accident. He sat still on the box for a long moment and listened. There it was again, closer to the front now, the faint drag of fabric across grain, and then the smaller sound underneath it, which was breath being held and then released and then held again by someone who was trying very hard not to be heard. Caleb Hollister climbed down from the box. He walked to the back of the wagon in the specific unhurried way of a man who did not want to alarm whatever was in there before he had assessed it. He set his hand on the canvas flap. He pulled it back. A young woman was sitting between the feed sack and the coil of fence wire with her back pressed hard against the wall of the wagon, and her knees drawn up under a long skirt of pale silk that did not belong within 50 miles of a supply wagon in Montana Territory. She had blonde hair coming loose from an elaborate arrangement of pins that had been assembled by someone with skill and time, and there was a small pearl comb hanging by one tooth at the side of her head, and her eyes were the wide, dark color of a woman who has just heard the flap open and does not yet know whether the person on the other side of it is her rescue or the end of everything. She was, he thought, 20 at the outside. She was wearing a wedding dress. He looked at her for what could not have been more than 2 seconds and understood most of the shape of it before she said a word. The dress, the hour, the pearl comb hanging loose, the specific desperation of a young woman who has climbed into a stranger's wagon in an alley behind a mercantile because she has run out of better options and has landed on this one because it was the only one still moving. He had seen women in trouble before. He had never seen one dressed for a ceremony. She leaned forward slightly. The lantern from the mercantile behind him threw a long slice of yellow light across her face, and she did not flinch from it, which he noted. She looked at him the way a person looks when they have decided in the last half-second that honesty is the only currency they have left to spend. "Pretend I'm your bride," she whispered, "until dawn breaks." Caleb Hollister looked at this woman he had never seen before, sitting in a silk dress between his feed sacks with her hands clenched white around a small beaded purse, and her eyes doing the specific arithmetic of someone who has already tried every other door in town and has arrived at his by process of elimination. Outside, somewhere past the far end of Silver Creek's main street, he could hear the sound of horses coming in fast from the south road, 4 or 5 of them, moving at the pace of men who had been riding hard and were slowing now because they had reached the place they intended to search. He did not know her name. He did not know what she was running from. But he knew the pace of horses that were looking for something, and he knew what it meant when a young woman in a wedding dress was hiding in the back of a stranger's wagon at dusk with the sound of those horses getting louder. "Lie down," he said. "All the way. Pull the tarp over the top of you and don't move until I tell you." She did it without a word. The silk made a small, dry rustling as she folded herself down against the boards, and then the canvas tarp came over her and she was gone, only the small shape of her under the fold, which he adjusted so it looked like nothing more than a bundle of sacking that had shifted in transit. He closed the wagon flap. He walked back around to the front. He climbed onto the box and picked up the reins and clicked the horses forward at the exact pace he had always used to leave a town, which was neither slow enough to invite attention nor fast enough to earn any. He was 30 yards down the main street when the riders reached the edge of it. 4 of them, as he had guessed, in dark coats and the kind of hats that had been chosen for utility rather than for showing at a wedding. They spread as they entered the town in the specific pattern of men who had done this before, one to the livery, one to the hotel porch, one moving slowly up the main street with his eyes on the doorways, and the last one, the one who was clearly in charge, sitting his horse in the middle of the street and looking at everything at once with the flat, unhurried attention of a man who was accustomed to finding what he came for. That last rider turned his head. He looked directly at Caleb's wagon, and he began, without hurry, to walk his horse toward it. Caleb kept the horses at the same pace. He did not turn his head toward the rider. He did not slow. He did not speed up. He held the reins with the same soft grip he had used to leave every town he had ever left, and he let the rider come to him because the rider was going to come to him either way, and there was no purpose in making the meeting more interesting than it needed to be. The wagon rolled past the last window of the mercantile. It rolled past the shuttered front of the assay office. The rider caught up with him in front of the church at the north end of the street, where the road began to bend toward the open country beyond the town, and pulled his horse alongside the box at an easy walk that matched the wagon's pace exactly. "Evening," the rider said. "Evening," Caleb said. The rider was a broad-shouldered man of about 40, with a close beard trimmed the way a man trims it when he expects to be looked at, and a good coat, and a good hat, and a good horse under him, all 3 of which had been paid for by someone who had money and who paid the rider enough of it to keep him presentable. He had a rifle in a scabbard by his knee that had been oiled recently. His eyes went to the wagon bed once, then back to Caleb, then to the wagon bed again with the specific slowness of a man who was building a picture and taking his time about it. "You come in from the south road today," he said. "North," Caleb said. "My place is up past the Elkhorn cutoff, 20 miles." The rider nodded slowly. He did not look convinced and he did not look unconvinced. He looked like a man who was letting a conversation run because conversation sometimes gave up more than direct questions did. "You see a young woman on your way through town," he said. "Yellow hair. She'd be dressed for a wedding." Caleb kept his eyes on the road ahead. He thought about what he had seen and he thought about what he was going to say, and he made the same decision he had made in the alley, which was that he did not yet know the shape of what this woman was running from, and until he did, the benefit of the doubt was hers, not the man riding beside him. Because a man who paid 4 riders to run down a woman on her wedding evening was not, in Caleb's experience, a man whose story needed defending. "My wife is in the back," he said. "She took ill this afternoon at her sister's place in town. That's why we're riding out at dusk instead of at noon like we'd meant to." The rider looked at him for a long moment. "Your wife," the rider said. Caleb finally turned his head and looked at the rider directly. He did it with the flat, unhurried expression of a man who had answered a question honestly and did not intend to answer it a second time. "That's what I said." There was a small sound from the back of the wagon. Not much of one, but enough. The canvas flap moved. The young woman pushed it aside from the inside and looked out at the rider with the composed expression of a person who had heard, through the boards of the wagon bed, exactly what was required of her and had assembled it in the 20 seconds she had been given. "Caleb," she said, "are we nearly out?" She had said the name the way a woman says the name of a man she has said it to 1,000 times. There was no performance in it. There was only the small, tired inflection of a woman who wanted to be somewhere else, and was asking whether the road was almost done. She had pulled the tarp down as she came forward, so that most of the silk was hidden, and she had somehow in the space of half a minute done something to her hair that made it look less like a ceremony, and more like an arrangement that had been slept on, and then partly repinned. Her face had color in it that had not been there before, high on the cheekbones, which he understood later she had produced by pinching herself very hard through the tarp before she pushed the flap aside. The rider looked at her for a long moment. He looked at her the way a man looks at a piece of a puzzle he had already half solved and was now being asked to unsolve. "Ma'am," he said. She did not answer him. She looked at Caleb with the small, impatient expression of a wife who was not interested in the errand of the man who had ridden up alongside her husband. She reached forward and put her hand on Caleb's arm, briefly, the way a woman touches her husband to remind him she is there and would prefer to be moving. Her hand was small and it was steady, and it was cold from the September evening, and she took it away again before it could become anything the rider might read. "We're going," Caleb said. He looked at the rider. "Anything else?" The rider's eyes went once more to the woman. They went to her hair. They went to the neckline of the dress, which she had covered with a fold of the tarp but which had not quite been covered enough, and the rider saw the pale silk under the coarse canvas, and his expression did the small tightening of a man who had just seen a piece of information he was going to have to decide what to do with. "That's a fine dress for a sick woman," the rider said. "She was standing up for her sister at the wedding this afternoon," Caleb said. "She took ill before it started. She has not had the time or the strength to change out of it." He said it the way he had said everything else, without heat and without emphasis, in the flat tone of a man who was telling a small domestic truth and did not particularly care whether it was believed. He clicked the horses forward as he said it, so that the wagon was already moving when he finished the sentence, and the rider had to nudge his own horse to keep pace with the box for the next several yards. The rider did not speak for a long moment. Caleb could feel him thinking. He could feel the 4 riders behind them somewhere at the other end of the town, and the specific shape of the calculation the man beside him was making, which was whether to press a story that did not quite fit against a woman who had told it steadily and a man who had not blinked, or to let the wagon go and answer for it later to the person who was paying him. The rider slowed his horse. He fell back a length. He fell back another. "Safe travels," he said. Caleb did not answer. He drove. The last building of Silver Creek passed on his right, and the road opened into the dark country beyond the town. He kept the horses at a walk for a full quarter-mile past the last building, because a wagon that broke into a trot the moment it cleared a town was a wagon that announced itself, and he was not going to hand the man behind him a reason to reconsider a decision that had already been difficult enough to make. The woman sat perfectly still on the boards behind him. She did not speak. She did not move the tarp. She waited the way a person waits who understands that the wrong sound at the wrong moment could still undo everything. He respected that. He had known men in the war who could not have managed it. When the road bent behind the first low rise and the town went out of sight behind them, he let the horses pick up their own pace, which was faster than a walk and short of a trot, the specific gait a working team fell into when they knew they were headed home, and the day had gone on long enough. The country opened up around the wagon in the soft blue color of the early evening, sagebrush and bunch grass, and the dark line of pines beginning halfway up the western slope, and above all of it, the first hard stars coming out one at a time in a sky that had gone from bruise to something closer to indigo. She came forward after another mile. She did it without asking, which he noted, sliding onto the box beside him with the silk of the dress folded up under her hands so it would not catch on the boards. Her feet were bare. She had left her wedding shoes somewhere. He did not know where, and there was a scrape along the side of one heel that had bled a little and dried. She sat looking at the road ahead the way he was looking at it, and for a long time neither of them said anything, which was the second thing he noted about her, that she was capable of a silence that did not need to be filled. "I owe you my life," she said finally. "I am aware of it. I do not have any way to pay it right now. I will find one. "You do not owe me anything yet," he said. "I have not decided what I am doing." She turned her head and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "I will tell you the whole of it," she said, "if you want to hear it now. Or I will tell you when we stop. Or I will tell you in the morning. Whichever suits you." "Now suits me," he said. "I would rather know before I have to make another decision about it than after." She nodded once. She looked back at the road. "My name is Wren Ashcroft," she said. "My father was Josiah Ashcroft. He ran the freight line out of Silver Creek and the 2 feeder routes to the mines up at Coldwater and Bear Gulch. He died in June." Caleb knew the name. Everyone in the northern half of the territory knew the Ashcroft freight line, and everyone had heard, in the way news traveled through country like this, that Josiah Ashcroft had gone off the road in a wagon accident on a stretch of the Coldwater Run that everyone who had driven it for 20 years agreed a man like Josiah Ashcroft would not have gone off of. Caleb had heard it twice from 2 different men and had not made anything of it at the time because he had not needed to. He did not say any of that. He said, "Go on." She was quiet for a long moment. She was not gathering herself, he thought. She was choosing where to begin, which was different, and which was the choice of a person who had told the story to herself many times already, and was now deciding which of the several possible entry points would carry the weight of it for a stranger who had not asked for the weight. "My father had a partner," she said. "Merritt Vance. He came into the freight line about 8 years ago when the Coldwater route was expanding, and my father needed capital he did not have. He put up money. He took a third share. He was, for a long time, exactly what he seemed, which was a competent man who was good with ledgers and unremarkable in most other ways. He came to supper at our house on Sundays for 6 years. My mother liked him. I did not dislike him. He was simply there." She paused. "My father began to be careful about the ledgers in April," she said. "I did not understand it at the time. He started keeping a second book at the house. He started taking the Coldwater Run himself instead of sending the drivers, which he had not done in years. He said it was because the road had gotten bad and he wanted to see it. I believed him because there was no reason not to. He went off the road in June on a stretch he had driven 100 times, and the wagon was found the next morning at the bottom of the gully with the harness cut in 3 places that could have been the fall and could have been a knife, and the man from the sheriff's office looked at it for a long time and then wrote down that it was the fall." Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Merritt Vance came to the house the week after the funeral," she said. "He was very kind. He explained that under the terms of the partnership agreement, the surviving partner had the right of first purchase on the deceased partner's share at a valuation the partnership itself determined. He said the valuation had already been done. He offered me a figure for my father's 2/3 of the freight line that was roughly a fifth of what it was worth. He said the offer was generous under the circumstances. He said the circumstances were that my father had been carrying private debts to certain men in Helena that Vance had been quietly covering for 2 years, and that if I did not accept the offer, those debts would become public and would attach to the estate and to me personally, and I would be left with nothing at all and a name that no one in the territory would extend credit to for the rest of my life." She looked at her hands. "I asked to see the debts," she said. "He would not show them. I asked to see the partnership agreement. He said the copy at the office had been lost and the copy at his house was with his lawyer. I asked for a week to consider. He gave me a day." Caleb thought about this for a stretch of road. "You didn't take the offer," he said. "I did not," she said. "I told him I would think on it. That was in July. In August he began to come to the house at odd hours. In the first week of September he brought a preacher with him. He said he had been thinking a great deal about my father's wish that I be looked after, and that he had decided the cleanest solution for both of us was marriage." She said it flatly, without decoration, which he understood was the only way she could have said it. He had noticed by now that she told the hard parts of a story in the shortest possible sentences, and he thought this was probably how she had gotten through the last 3 months intact, by refusing to allow any single piece of what had happened to her to take up more room in a sentence than it strictly required. "I refused him," she said. "I refused him in front of the preacher, and I refused him in front of the housekeeper, and I refused him the second time when he came back the following Sunday with 2 of the freight line men behind him. He did not shout at me. He never shouted. He simply said that he understood, and that he would give me until the end of the month to reconsider, and that if I had not reconsidered by then, he would proceed with the debt collection through the courts in Helena, and I would find, when the papers came, that the debts named more than the estate. He said they would name me. He said the freight line kept its books in a particular way, and that there were entries in those books my father had signed that placed personal obligations on me by the time I was of age, and that he could produce them and would. She was quiet. I did not know if he was lying, she said. I did not know if my father had signed anything of the sort. I have been going through my father's papers at the house for 6 weeks trying to find out. I have found nothing that says he did. I have found nothing that says he did not. I have found other things, which is why I am in your wagon. Caleb waited. I found a letter in my father's desk in the second week of September, she said. It was written to a man named Elias Trumbull, who is the federal deputy marshal for the district out of Helena. My father had drafted it in May. He had not sent it. In the letter he laid out what he believed Merritt Vance was doing with the Coldwater accounts and with the certain men in Helena, and he named names, and he set out dates and freight manifests and the specific rerouting of certain shipments that he believed added up to something the marshal's office would be interested in. He wrote at the bottom of the letter that he intended to make one more run to Coldwater himself to confirm what he suspected before he sent it. He never sent it. Caleb thought about a freight wagon at the bottom of a gully with a harness that had been cut in 3 places. The letter is at the house, she said. I did not bring it with me. I did not have time. Vance came to the house this morning with the preacher and 4 men and my mother's cousin, who had ridden in from Bozeman to stand with me because the housekeeper had sent for her, and Vance had the cousin turned around at the door and told the preacher to proceed. I went upstairs to change. I climbed out the window of the upstairs hallway and down the porch roof, and I ran through the back garden and through 3 alleys, and I got into the first wagon I found in the alley behind the mercantile because there was no other wagon in it and I could hear the men coming into the yard behind me. She turned her head and looked at him. That is the whole of it, she said, or as much of it as I know. Caleb drove for a long stretch without speaking. The wagon rolled through the sagebrush country, and the road climbed gradually toward the first bench of the foothills, and the stars came out fully overhead in the way they came out in Montana at that time of year, hard and close and very many, so that a man driving under them could almost hear them if he had been out in the country long enough to have learned the specific quality of listening it required. He thought about a letter in a desk drawer in a house in Silver Creek. He thought about a partner who had explained a valuation the day after a funeral. He thought about a young woman in a wedding dress in the back of his wagon and about the 4 riders behind him in the town who had not been dressed for a ceremony. The letter, he said. Who else knows about it? No one, she said. The housekeeper knows my father was writing to Trumbull. She does not know about what. She knew he was troubled in May. She knew he was writing at night. She does not know the contents of the letter, and she does not know it was left unsent. Where is it? In the false bottom of the middle drawer of his desk. My father built the desk. He built the drawer that way. He showed me when I was 14. He said every man ought to have one drawer no one else knew about. Vance did not know about it. He would not have known where to look. The desk is at the house. Yes. Vance is at the house. Yes, she said. Or he will be by morning if he is not already. He will go through the papers. He will not find the letter unless someone tells him where to look. He may burn the papers he does find. He may not. It will depend on whether he thinks he still needs to appear reasonable to the neighbors or whether he has decided he does not. Caleb thought about this. The cousin from Bozeman, he said. Where is she now? I do not know, she said. She was still in town when I ran. She was staying at the boarding house on Cedar Street. She is a woman of about 60, and she is not afraid of Vance. She will still be in town in the morning unless he has done something to make her leave, which I do not think he has the standing to do. Not to her. Caleb nodded slowly. He was building the shape of something in his head, and he did not like most of the pieces of it, but he liked the letter, and he liked the cousin, and he liked the fact that a federal deputy marshal in Helena had already been named by a dead man in writing, which was the kind of paper that did not evaporate simply because the man who wrote it had gone off a road. "My place is another 11 miles," he said. "We will not make it tonight. There is a line shack about 4 miles up the road that I use in the summer. It has a stove and a roof and a bar on the door. We will stop there. In the morning I will decide what I am doing." She looked at him. "You have already decided what you are doing," she said, "or you would have handed me down at the church and gone home." He did not answer her. She was correct, and they both knew it, and there was no advantage to saying it aloud. He drove. The line shack sat in a shallow fold of ground where a small creek came down out of the pines and turned east across a meadow. And Caleb had built it himself the summer after he took the place, meaning to have somewhere to sleep during the high pasture work in June and July, when riding back to the main house, every night ate the daylight he needed for the cattle. It was one room and a stove and a bunk, and a small square window, and a bar for the door that dropped into iron brackets. He had forged himself at the smithy in town. He got the horses into the small pole corral behind the shack and rubbed them down and threw them what hay was left in the shed, and carried the tin of coffee and a piece of the salt pork and a wedge of hard bread inside. And by the time he had the fire going in the stove, she had swept the floor with a broom she had found in the corner and had put water on to boil in the tin pot without asking him where anything was, which he noted for the third time that evening. They ate at the small plank table by the stove. She had wrapped herself in one of the wool blankets from the wagon and had taken the pearl comb out of her hair and set it on the table beside her plate the way a person sets down something they are not yet sure whether they are going to keep. She ate slowly and steadily and without complaint about the food, which he had expected complaint about because the food was rough and she was not. And when she had finished, she took the plate to the small basin by the stove and washed it in the water that was left from the coffee and dried it with a corner of the blanket and set it back on the shelf where she had found it. "You have done this before," he said. "I grew up on the freight line," she said. "My father took me on the runs from the time I was 7. I have slept in worse shacks than this, and I have eaten worse suppers than this, and I have washed my own plate every night of my life since I was old enough to reach the basin. My mother said a woman who could not keep her own camp was a woman who had never earned the right to any camp anyone else kept." She sat down again at the table across from him. "Your wife," she said. "I am sorry. I saw the second cup on the shelf and the shape of the shelf, and I understood before you said anything." He looked at her. He had not said anything about a wife. He looked at the shelf, and he saw what she had seen, which was the space where the second cup had sat for 6 years without being used, and the small mark on the wood where it had left a ring, and he understood that she had noticed it walking past on her way to the basin, and had understood the whole of it in a glance the way he had understood the whole of her in a glance at the alley behind the mercantile. "6 years," he said. "In the winter. She was carrying our first." "I am sorry," she said again. She did not say anything else. She did not try to fill it with the small pieces of sympathy that people who did not know how tried to fill it with. She let it sit on the table between them the way a thing is allowed to sit when it has already been carried a long time. He said, "Thank you." They slept in shifts. He took the first watch. He woke her at 2 hours before dawn, and she took the second watch without a word, sitting by the small square window with the blanket around her shoulders and the bar of the door within reach. And when he woke on his own an hour before first light, she was still exactly where he had left her, and the fire in the stove had been kept fed at the exact right pace to hold the room warm without wasting the wood. They ate what was left of the bread. They saddled the wagon in the gray light. He turned the team not north toward his ranch but east toward the wagon road that ran the long way around the elkhorn benches and came down eventually into Helena. She looked at him from the box. "Helena," she said. "Helena," he said. "We will stop at the ranch first for fresh horses and for a gun that shoots straighter than the one in the wagon, and then we will go on. Your cousin will meet us on the Bozeman Road at the second crossing. I sent a boy from the shack at first light. He knows the country, and he is faster on a horse than any man Vance has riding for him." She will bring the letter with her. She will have gone to the house herself before sunup. The housekeeper will let her in and she will find the drawer, because you will have told the boy where it is and the boy will have told her. And by the time Vance understands what is happening, the letter will be in the hand of a woman he cannot turn away at a door, and it will be on its way to Elias Trumbull with a cousin of a dead man riding beside it. She looked at him for a long time. "You worked all of that out in the night," she said. "I worked it out in the first mile of road," he said. "I spent the night deciding whether I was going to do it, and I am doing it," he said. They reached Helena in 4 days. Trumbull read the letter in front of them in his office on the second floor of the federal building, and he read it twice, and he set it down, and he looked at Wren Ashcroft in a dress her cousin had brought her from Bozeman, and he said that he had been waiting for a letter of this sort for 2 years, and had not known it would come from a dead man. Merritt Vance was arrested at his home in Silver Creek 11 days later. The freight line was returned to Wren under a federal receivership that lasted 6 months and was closed in the spring with her name clear on every ledger. The certain men in Helena were named in the papers by June. She did not go back to the house in Silver Creek to live. She sold it in the fall. She kept the desk. They were married in the small church at the north end of Silver Creek in the second week of October. 1 year and 1 month after the evening, he had pulled back the canvas flap of his wagon in the alley behind the mercantile. She wore a plain gray dress she had made herself. She carried no flowers. She had said, when he asked her about it, that she had already worn a wedding dress once for a wedding that was not a wedding, and that this one did not need any dressing up to be what it was. She had asked him to pretend. He never did, not for a single mile of the road.